Coming to you live from Radio Cayman Studio.
For the record.
For the record. Hear from your government officials, independents, and the opposition on issues that matter to you. The record. Engage in an open dialogue between residents and lawmakers.
For the record.
The record. Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record. And now, your host, Orit Connor.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. Today being Wednesday, the 20th day of September 2017. First of all, I want to wish a belated happy birthday to Miss Georgette. This morning, she indicated to us on Monday that her birthday would be on Tuesday. Of course, we didn't have a show on Tuesday, so we want to say a belated happy birthday to Miss Georgette this morning. I want to thank you, our listening and viewing audience, for allowing Radio Cayman, and by extension of that, For the Record, into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. For the Record is a show produced by the staff and the management of Radio Cayman, and it is geared towards keeping you abreast of issues as they arise and play out on the local, regional, and international scene. I am your host, Orit Connor, my two co-hosts, Ms. Theresa Pitcairn and Dr. Steve Macfield, and you're welcome to join us every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday from 7:30 a.m. until 9:30 a.m. Our phone lines are always open. There is always someone there waiting to take your calls. Normally, it's that beautiful radio voice of Miss Susan Watson. You can call us on our toll-free number, provided courtesy of Flow. That toll-free number is 1-800-534-8255. You can also call us on 949-8037 and the 949-6990. And, of course, if you don't like to talk on the telephone, then email us at fortherecord. That is one word, For the Record, at candw.ky. We also want to extend, again, our prayers and our sympathies for those islands in the Eastern Caribbean that have been severely affected by another Hurricane Maria, which last night or yesterday evening got up to Category 5 hurricane, and it is in the process of now battering Puerto Rico. We have not yet received, or I haven't been able to see exactly what the damage has been in the British Virgin Islands, but we know for a fact that Dominica was severely hit by Hurricane Maria as well. The area of Marigot in Dominica severely damaged. So our prayers go out to them. Fortunately, here in the Cayman Islands, in this hurricane season so far, we have not been affected by any hurricanes, and we hope that that remains the same. Of course, that puts us in a very good position to render whatever assistance we can and are willing to render to other jurisdictions that have been affected by hurricanes as well. So with that, I want to say good morning to my two co-hosts, Ms. Theresa, Dr. Steve Macfield. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Mr. For the Record, and good morning to our co-host, Theresa Pitcairn, and good morning to all your listeners locally and those that are listening abroad. I would also like to send my belated happy birthday to Miss Georgette, a friend of mine who I've known for many, many, many years. And I wish you all the best, and I wish that you may live to be 95 more, if that is possible. You have a great life, and you have made a great contribution to these islands, and I really appreciate that. And I think that you are one of the few people now who are still alive, who made that great stride for human rights and for the rights of women in this country. And I really, really congratulate you for that on your birthday. You're 90 today, and I wish that I could reach 90. I hope that I do reach 90, and I have so happy 90 for you, Miss Georgette. And I would also like to say today one of our ardent listeners, one of our prominent residents of Georgetown, that the rumors that we have heard concerning the putting a second story onto the town hall and renting it out. I want you to know that I never forgot you about that. I have tried everywhere to get to the bottom of that to see whether it was true or not. And so far, I would like to say to you that I don't believe that it's true. That I don't think that they would be so crazy to try to take the top off the town hall and put a second floor in it with a view to renting it out to some commercial use. But I will keep you informed if I get any other information and news about that. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think like the Compass, who's now the Cayman's new director, direction finder. It seems that we've lost our way, so we have to depend on the Cayman Compass now. The Caymanians have now to depend on the Cayman Compass now to find a direction where we should go in our political and social and economic life. But I don't believe that that's possible, that they'll be so dumb or foolish enough to take the roof off the town hall, put a second floor in it with a view to renting it. I don't think that's going to happen.
Misty, good morning.
So thanks very much, everyone. That is the local audience and those abroad for having us in their homes. And like you, I'd like to extend a very, very warm and heart-feeling happy birthday greeting to the phenomenal, the awesome, the only Miss Georgette. Thank you so very much for what you have done for us, what you continue to do, and wishing you an amazing week. Don't just enjoy the one day for the birthday, Make sure that lasts the whole week. All right?
I think Miss Georgette just enjoys life, period, which is good. And she demonstrates
amazing.
that all the time. Yeah.
She's amazing.
Yeah. Well, I see we are now importing chickens into the Cayman Islands by boat, and it is not, what is it called, best dressed chicken. Yes. It isn't that.
But not only that, OC on to make sure and to get them high as well to survive the travel across the ocean.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it is not just the best dressed chicken, actually roosters, and there are so many things that are happening in the underground here in the Cayman Islands that we don't talk about. People don't talk about it. People don't expose it. You hear callers call in repeatedly about numbers and legalizing numbers. No one really knows the extent of the exchange, how much activity, the economic activity, as far as the numbers game is concerned. But according to lots of people, it is pretty high. Cockfighting, rooster fighting takes place in the Cayman Islands. Wow. Not something that is part of our heritage and part of our tradition. It has been imported here just like other things as well. That is the risk that you run when you become multicultural. These are the things that you have to accept. It also speaks to the whole issue of border control, which is not a simple issue. There is no simple solution to it when you are surrounded by water. No simple solution whatsoever. The authorities have to work with intelligence, inside information, and everything else to really stem the flow. Which brings us to the question, what is more successful? Fighting the inflow of drugs into the Cayman Islands, because that is where most of the other incidentals come from. The smuggling of drugs, you end up with firearms. You end up with now cockfighters coming in as well. Do we need to focus more on the importation, or do we need to focus more on the consumption that is taking place in the Cayman Islands? Because it is not just the person who is unemployed. It is not the person who is living in the quote-unquote ghetto area who's consuming drugs, you have all persons, a cross section of Caymanian society who are consuming drugs, and as a result of that, keeps the demand up for them. Any comments?
Well, OC, when I read that story about the roosters being imported in cages on the canoes coming to Cayman, I remind me of a story about old Rossi from West Bay. And I was telling this story to a lot of the school children one time about Rossi carrying a rooster from West Bay to Mr. Bunyan Whitaker in Northside. Mm-hmm. And he had the rooster's beak tied and the feet tied. And he'd passed through Georgetown, and Mr. Bernard had given him one of those envelopes with 10 shillings to give Miss Tima from Breakers. And he had stopped in Bordentown because Rossi on the walk that night. And he had stopped in Bordentown, and the string came off the rooster's beak. And in the middle of the night, he was by Logan's shop. And the rooster started in the middle of the night. And William Bill McCoy was the police constable, the special constable in Bordentown in charge of law and order. And they say he had a 12-cell flashlight. He could flash it from Bordentown to Breaker, so Waldo could get home at night when he came from the rum shop. And the rooster's going cook in the night. And William Bill McCoy said, Bill Ration, because said, who goes there? Who goes there? And Rossi was very perturbed because he knew he was clashing with one of the top policemen in the country. And he says, Crown Sergeant. And he held up the envelope. And it had Mr. Bordapano named it on Majesty Service, and he was arrested for impersonating the Crown Sergeant.
We have one caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record and a belated happy birthday.
Good morning, Mr. O.C. Good morning, Teresa. Good morning, Dr. Maxfield.
Good morning, Ms. Georgette.
Oh, my goodness, this is Georgia Lee Banks. I can't thank the three of you enough for all the kind words you have said about me this morning. I've known you for, I can't tell how long, Steve, if you don't mind me calling you.
No.
Here. And Teresa, I barely know you, but you and my oldest daughter have always been good friends, Anita.
Mm-hmm.
And O.C., I've known you for a long, long time.
Yes, ma'am.
And your family. So please indulge me and let me say a few extra words this morning.
Certainly.
On Sunday, as I told Miss Susan a while ago, my youngest daughter and her husband and my other two daughters had a lunch up at Laura's house for me on Sunday. And I felt so bad that my youngest granddaughter, I'm getting ahead of myself. Ella's daughter, Satina, she only has one daughter, Satina, she had a cold. She couldn't come to the lunch. I felt so bad about that. My one only brother, Booth, he went and got a cold. He couldn't get there. That made me feel, as my dear friend Rushbrook McLaughlin would say, what's her? So I said, and there Janelle and her husband, she got married in June to her Norwegian boyfriend here in Cayman. And they're up in Manchester, England. But thank God my one only grandson, Jason, he was there. And we were sitting at the table, eating up all that good food and talking and laughing. When I looked up, Mr. O.C., Teresa, Dr. Steve, what a blessing. I wasn't standing up. I know I would have fallen. There comes in my daughter Janelle and her Norwegian husband. They had arrived from Manchester, England on Saturday night. And naturally they came and stayed at her parents' house. And they were hiding in one of the rooms and trying to keep quiet.
What a surprise.
That just put the icing candles on the cake. And by the way, Miss Teresa, my birthday cake that they got for me was, I think you call it black forest, and beautifully decorated with the 9 and the door, 90, and the candles to blow out. And we had all kind of good food. But the most important thing was having my family around me.
Yes.
And I am going to soon leave you now because I know other people need to come on. But so many people called me here in Cayman, and I would not even think about calling their names because I might forget somebody. But there is one person out of all the Cayman people. Oh, and my first son-in-law, Tony Costa, I think,
Yes.
you probably know
Yes,
him.
I know Tony.
He called from Jamaica. And a young woman who worked at the post office, which means now gone to live in England, she called and wished me happy birthday. But what I want to, as I said, I won't try to name out all those people here on the island who called me. But there's one person, the first local call I got was from my dear friend, Miss Bernice Miles, and she started off by singing Happy Birthday, and she has a lovely voice too, and I appreciate that. And all the others who called, thank you, and God bless. And Mr. O.C., thank you for giving me all this time
To run up my mouth. I knew she was going to say that.
No problem, Miss Georgia. You're a star. You're a star in your own way. Thank you very much. We have to take a commercial break now. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Ms. Teresa Pitkin, Dr. Steve Macfield. We're going to, for the entire part of this show this morning, we're going to focus on the constitutional discussions, the constitutional negotiations that took place in 2009 in relation to the advisory district councils. To do that, we have the verbatim minutes, the extracts of those minutes from those discussions, and we want to share them with you. In order to do that accurately, we're going to read directly from those minutes as well, and we will indicate when we're reading the person who the remarks are associated with as well. We only have about 4 minutes to go, so it'll probably be the introduction to it, and then we will continue when we return after the news. And like I said, we want to focus exclusively on those negotiations this morning. So this is from the Constitutional Negotiations, 16th of January, 2009, on advisory district councils. The chairman at that time was Mr. Ian Henry, who was former FCO official, legal expert, constitutional expert, who was in charge of the negotiations on behalf of the UK government. On the Cayman Islands side, our now Premier, Honourable Alden McLaughlin, basically was the one who was driving it for the government at that point in time, did an excellent job. He knew exactly what he was talking about. And of course, all of this was facilitated by the Constitutional Review Secretariat, which was headed up by Ms. Suzanne Bothwell. So the chairman, Mr. Ian Henry, here are his words. So I'm afraid that has to go on the list for London. That has to go on the list for London. But the list is not huge, even with those 2 points, and I'll come back to summarize where I think we're at on that list. That leaves the new text on district councils, which was circulated last evening, and I'm trying to find it. Here we are. Proposed district councils provision. My first comment on this text is to wonder why it is necessary. I don't. Legally, I don't think it is necessary because, of course, it's the legislature that makes laws for peace, order, and good governance for the Cayman Islands, provided they are compatible with the Constitution and don't contravene the Colonial Laws Validity Act requirements. There is full power to legislate, so it's not necessary to say that a law enacted by the legislature may provide for this or that in terms of district councils. It's not necessary to do that. So I wondered why it was thought necessary or useful to have a specific provision apparently enabling the legislature to do something which it can already do. So what Mr. Henry here is questioning is not whether or not we should have advisory district councils, but whether we needed to have it in the Constitution, as opposed to the fact that we already have provisions to make laws in the Cayman Islands and we could just simply put it in the legislation. When we return from the news, one of my co-hosts will then read the Honorable Alden McLaughlin's response to Mr. Henry on that particular point, and after that, then another of my co-hosts will read the Honorable W. McKeever's response to it as well. And I want you to pay careful attention to this, and I will make inquiries from Ms. Susan on whether or not we can post this somewhere on the Radio Cayman's Facebook page, or what we would like to post this document somewhere so all and sundry can see, because this whole issue of advisory district councils and the implementation of the provisions of the Constitution is going to remain a hot topic until it is addressed. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back immediately after the news. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. As I said, we're going to dedicate the entire show this morning to the constitutional talks and specifically the discussions on advisory district councils. Before we went to our 8 o'clock news, you heard me read the comments of the chairman, Mr. Ian Henry, and he questioned the need to have the provisions for advisory district councils in our Constitution, and basically to say there should be a law to have that when in fact the legislature in the Cayman Islands is empowered to make laws for the Cayman Islands. So we will now read the remarks from the Honorable Alden McLaughlin, who at that time was leading the talks in relation to the government. Ms. Teresa.
Right. So the Premier said, well, based on that, sir, perhaps we need to express it a little differently. I think the feeling on both sides is that we want there to be a constitutionally recognized, but we want, and as Steve and OC and I read this, the audience should appreciate that some of the stuff that's in this is not necessarily clear or coherent, because you can imagine when these discussions were being had that there were interruptions from side to side, and some of the times some of the persons that were participating would actually lose their train of thought.
Yes.
So I just say that so that you know when I pause that there is a pause in the context. But we want the concept of district councils as advisory bodies to the MLAs to be constitutionally recognized and required. This is all part of trying to build a better democratic framework and infrastructure so that there is more participation by the community in the work of the legislature through its MLAs. And this was something that was talked about as we all did the rounds during the constitutional modernization education exercise. So that's why we, I think, collectively feel it ought to find its place in the Constitution. And these were the concerns and views of the Honorable Alden McLaughlin at the time.
And there's, if I could interrupt for a second, there's no question at that point in time, based on his statements there, that this is what they wanted, and they wanted it in the Constitution. And I take note in the second paragraph there, it says constitutionally recognized and required. That is required. Dr. McPhail.
And the Honorable W. McKeever Bush is now speaking. Mr. Chairman, this comes from our findings in the community, and we put it in our document, and we proposed it when we began this process. And I don't have a problem with that, what the government is saying and the way this is drafted, because if we are really talking about the government, the Constitution, and things that can augment and enhance democracy and involvement, the Constitution has to prove it, but not just to say that a law may provide. I think it must be shall provide for it. I don't know that we should leave the establishment and functions of a law if we really want to have empowerment of people. I feel this is that way about this as I felt about the Senate, which the government has rejected. I think this is what people want. They want to be more involved, but they don't want to leave it to the whims and fancy of a government that may put in place a law or abolish a law. So it has constitutional provision. It's much harder to take what people feel is right away from them, to be involved. And what we are doing is giving them a constitutional right and provisions to be in the Constitution.
And here are the remarks then from Mr. Ian Henry, the chairman. Well, I think if there are going to be such district councils established, I think it would have to be done by virtue of a law in order to set out how they are composed and what they can do. So I don't see a way around that. The other point I was going to make is, it is not, my first remark should not be taken as saying it is not possible to have a provision. It is just, it's legally unnecessary because a law can provide for these things anyway. But as I understood Alden's point, and McKeever making the same point, that part of the purpose of saying something in the Constitution is to give this emphasis, is to give this optical emphasis. And the one word that seems to me crucial, if it's designed to enhance democracy in this text, is the word elected. If it's to enhance democracy, should it not be the establishment, functions, and jurisdictions of elected councils for each electoral district? Otherwise, it could be read as being the intention here to have a law which simply provides for councils which are appointed by some supremo who chooses whoever he or she wants to sit on it. So I think it is, if it's designed to show a positive optical message to enhance democracy, one should insert the word elected before councils in the second line. So here Mr. Ian Henry is pointing to the fact that the councils should be elected. And we will now hear the responses from the Honorable Alden McLaughlin and others in relation to that as well. Ms. T.
Right. So
Bush first. The Honorable McKeever Bush. Mr. Chairman, I am not going to agree to that. Not a matter of democracy. Yes, it is another form of addition to addendum to the democracy. But, Mr. Chairman, I don't believe that this country needs to go into that kind of expense for what we have in mind, because that's what it would create. If you're saying that we should have an elective council and then you do that, no. To me, they're going to create more politics that we don't need. And I don't think people want that. What the people want to say, And if we give a constitutional provisions where they say that there must be a council and that the people appointed there give the MLAs their feelings on what affects them, where the road should be and how many roads should be and whether the school should go there or whether we do need another post office, and take into consideration the expenditure for that. I think that's what people want. I don't think, and you would find some of that would want to be elected because they feel like they should have standing equal to MLAs. But if they want to do that, then go put their money up and let us turn the spotlight on them. But I don't think a second tier is going to help us.
Right. So Mr. Bush was actually, in response to Mr. Henry, he was raising the concerns of cost and elections. So, for example, if you were going to have the council, because Mr. Henry was thinking that there ought to be some form of election or some kind of local, kind of local government. And Mr. Bush was essentially saying, no, we want a system where the Caymanian people will have a say, where they can share their views. And, he was also concerned about cost. Mr. Alden McLaughlin, our current premier, he then responded to Mr. Bush and the rest in the room by saying, Mr. Chairman, we actually agree with Mr. Bush. We don't think that what we need or is warranted is essentially local government. A system of local government below the MLAs. What we want, I think all of us, is advisory councils to advise the MLAs, not to bind the MLA because he is the one or she is the one that is elected. So we're ad idem at this point.
And then the chairman says, how is it proposed then? How is it envisaged that any such council would be composed if they are not elected? And then the chairman, Mr. Ralston Anglin, wanted to speak at that point in time, but then the Honourable Alden McLaughlin again says, Mr. Risa?
That would all be dealt with, sir, through legislation. So Ralston was actually intervening because he then wanted to set out and to clarify.
Yeah, and we will read what he has said afterwards in relation to that. And then the chairman says, but what do you envisage the legislation would say as to how the councils would be composed? And then I'll read what Mr. Ralston Anglin then says. He says, what we always envisioned was that the council would always be appointed by the premier, leader of the opposition, and the governor would have an appointment on the council. And so let's say for a particular district, there was going to be 7 council persons. Each of those would get 3. The governor, would get 1, and that way, that would be the independent member of the council, right? And we want it that way because we wanted to ensure that the ruling or government party, for example, didn't just get to put 7 on and say, here's the councillors for the district who duly represent the broad population within the district. And again, this is Mr. Anglin speaking. I am searching, sir, for our discussion paper because I think it did. I'm not sure that spoke to it, but it certainly did. Yes, here it is. The district councils would be appointed by the government, opposition, and the governor, with the balance of power typically resting in the hands of the governor's appointee as they are seen as the independent members. So no party loyalty or association. This would be on page 16 of our discussion paper. And of course, that discussion paper is a discussion paper that the opposition at that point in time put forward in relation to the constitutional talks. We're going to take a commercial break now. When we return, we will continue to read verbatim from the constitutional discussion, 16th day of January 2009 on advisory district councils. Please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. In the studio with me this morning, Mr. Teresa Pitcairn, Dr. Steve McPhail, and we're reading directly from the constitutional negotiations, the minutes from the constitutional negotiations on the 16th of January 2009 on advisory district councils. We will continue now.
And the Honorable McKeever Bush then jumped in and he said, and Mr. Chairman, a good point is being raised that later on, if the country finds itself where we have funds to operate a true system of local governance, then we could, graduate to that. But we don't want to do that. We want to be able to give the people the say, but at the same time, and give them constitutional standing, but at the same time, keep costs down. And to me, that's one of the big things. Costs and less politics too. Less politics. This Senate is, why don't you stick to building roads? You don't know nothing about a Senate.
I believe that was the Honorable Ard McLean, Minister responsible for infrastructure, who was trying to
intervene. Yes.
So that was a little funny interjection there as well. So, Ms. Teresa, I'm going to ask you, we also had people from civil society represented during those negotiations as well that were held here in Cayman. And Mr. Eddie Thompson had some comments as well. I'd like you to read those.
Right. So he said, Mr. Chair, in response to the Honorable McKeever Bush, Mr. Chair, if I might ask, and pardon me for my ignorance if it's more than obvious, but would this mean then that the general populace would have to go through this council, these councils, and so then et cetera, it just kind of waves off. And
then McKeever Bush jumped in again and said, you mean that they wouldn't have access to government?
And Eddie's response was, to government as a whole.
And Mr. Bush replied and said, no, but we would be stupid. And the government would be stupid to bypass their constituents.
And Eddie said, it goes back to the question if they should be elected then as opposed to being appointed.
And McKeever Bush said, no.
Eddie then said, at the end of the day, the general public has access to the government. It's just much ado about nothing.
And Mr. Bush said, no. I think that any representative, the governor together will appoint people across party lines and they will have good input. But you are not going to bypass your constituents.
And Eddie's response was, so this would be somewhat mimicking single-member constituencies to some extent.
And then Mr. Ralston Anglin said, Mr. Chairman, let me elaborate on this point just for 2 minutes. What we find typically in our districts is that after a general election, you typically, as in any constituency anywhere, you have people who are firmly for you, against you, and then you have some in the middle that you've won, right? Now, after an election is all over, and you go into running the district for 4 years, one of the weaknesses that we have found in our districts is that usually the people that you get most of your input and advice from, just because of the fact that you had to go out and run and you have a campaign committee, etc., are the people who supported you, and you oftentimes do not get to reach out and get not necessarily a relationship but input from other people as well. One of the real benefits of this is that it will, at the district level, ensure that every district, as we're trying to build our communities, is getting a voice that is truly representative of the entire community. We see this as a key building block for us in terms of community development and interaction with the community. To answer Mr. Thompson's question, if someone wants to come to my MLA office to see me, they can come. However, if once we go down this route and you get good, strong terms of reference and the councils get up and running and really become bodies that are recognized within the community, getting things done, sure, people are going to then go when councils call their meetings and say, well, we think a park would be good or on X street. But this is going to be a process. We're not expecting this to happen overnight. We just see it as a good first building block to true community participation and involvement in a formalized way. Just to say, Mr. Chairman, this wasn't dreamt up overnight. I mean, right now, there's a nonprofit organization in Cayman called the West Bay Community Council. That was something that was formed in 2001 or 2002. I can't remember the exact time. But it was aimed to try and do this exact same thing because we kept hearing from the public after getting elected, well, how do we really do things better? How do we be better organized? How do we really get our voices to you in a more collaborative and a more formal manner? This would be a first step. Now, in 3, 4, 5 elections, God spare life, who knows what the public will want? The public may then be at the point where they say, we would like a model of local government. Let's think about it. And then we may commission such a study, but that's down the road. For right now, we see this as a good first step. Let's get this built. Let's get it functioning and working. And then the chairman says, I think my conclusion on this is that as drafted, it is clear that the real, not battleground, but the real time when the details need to be sorted out is when a bill comes forward for discussion, because it will need legislation to sort it out. And provided that the text as it is at the moment is neutral, which it is, I would have preferred to see the word elected before councils. But I can see that this argument may still need to be carried through. So it's neutral and it does not rule out the option of elected councils. I think my inclination, even though it is not legally necessary to say that, if you both regard it as important for optical reasons, is to leave, I would recommend leaving this language exactly as it is, and curious as it may seem, because it is not necessary to have it. We simply put it in, and it is for later to work it all out in terms of legislation. If there's any push to change any of this carefully drafted language, I fear that we would have to take it back to London, because I think we could advise on matters that this is, albeit legally unnecessary, it is a thing for a later day. It's a thing for you to sort out at a later day. So are we happy then just to take this language? And then the chairman goes on to say, well, I don't mind. I think that you need to, if you're going to do it, it doesn't really matter one way or the other.
And Mr. Bush continues saying, I don't mind what you just said. And then the chairman
says, okay. And then I'd like you to read what Miss Susan Dixon has to say. And Susan Dixon, she was the legal advisor to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. She actually replaced Ian Henry in that role, because when Ian Henry was basically chairing this, he was basically semi-retired from the FCO at that point in time.
Mm-hmm. So she said, I just wondered in the heading whether you should call it perhaps a community council, which was the way that Ralston was referring to it, because, well, maybe it's just for us in the UK. District councils seems to me to imply something that you don't seem to be talking about. and community council might be better.
And then Mr. Bush replying to her said, Miss Dixon, sometimes we will speak, and I speak of my district. We will speak of this community of Governor Sound and a community of Northwest Point. So I think district is right, meaning the elected district.
And then the chairman asked the governor, Stuart Jack, at that point in time, to chime in as well. Anybody want to be Stuart Jack? Just for the reading, because I don't think you would want to be him otherwise.
Well, he said, I'm sorry, I've just got one point of clarification. Is it envisaged that these committees should have any executive functions at all? Because potentially, if they were to do so, that might derogate from the powers of other parts of government and would therefore have to be reflected in the Constitution.
So Arden just said advisory.
And Governor Jack said advisory only? Okay.
And then the chairman said to operate as advisory bodies. And we didn't get the rest of what he said there.
And then Mikiva Bush jumped in and says, and if you want to put that in the heading, propose advisory district council.
And then the chairman says advisory district council.
And then Mikiva then replied, I don't mind that.
So that's the extent of the discussions on the 16th day of January 2009 as far as advisory district councils are concerned. And we then ended up with it in our constitution, and we ended up with a law after that, which everyone seems to now find wanting in certain respects, and also feels that that legislation needs to be amended as a result of the 19 single-member constituencies that we now have. We're going to take a commercial break. When we return, both of my colleagues here have made some notes in relation to this and people's position on it, and we will talk about those when we return. So please stay tuned for the record. We'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. I believe that we have callers on the phone line. Ms. Susan, let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, OC. Good morning, Dr. McPhail, and good morning to Ms. Kern.
Good morning, Mr. Bryan.
Good morning.
I must say I'm so happy to have you guys have read out those transcripts in respect to what was discussed before. It was very enlightening and helped me in my position in respect as an elected member for Georgetown Central on what was discussed and why it was discussed. And I think the country will be in a better position of understanding where we're at in respect to district councils. But I hate to say it, but I think I'm more confused on how to move forward with it now as a result of those discussions, because it's highlighted some important points that I myself didn't recognize before and have to consider, because I think the hiccup at that particular point was whether they should be elected or not, whether they should be having that authority in the separations of local government. And then if they're not elected, if they're appointed, the potential bias of who's going to be appointing them and could be politically influenced. I'm really determined on getting it done, because that's the promise that I've given the people of Georgetown Central. But I see the hiccup where the government is hesitant to take it in its current form, because the more I read it, the more complicated it gets in respect to how somebody can point out, well, boy, this is biased because of the appointment point, and then the election point will create two separations of government. I'm just hoping that the government can bring it right away. I personally would like to see a motion I believe may be coming in the next sitting of the House. I'm not going to try to jump the horse before it comes out, but for it to take focus ASAP. Forget about the budget. I think you guys have highlighted a very important point on a previous show, that the budget is kind of irrelevant to it at this stage. It's just to get them going. But any ideas based on that conversation that you can share with me from an advice standpoint of how best to go about it, because it seems to me that discussion kind of still ended at a no pass, in my view. They just basically said, okay, I'm okay with that, but didn't address the problem. If anybody understands what I'm saying.
Can you repeat that again for me, Mr. Bryan? Sorry.
I don't think that there was a position found that everybody was happy with, because you still find a situation now where they don't want local government, a separate local government, but they're concerned about the political influence on appointing them and who appoints them, because it will be political no matter what. Just a perception, regardless, even if the Premier said, you know what, I'm going to be totally unbiased, but the committee do it, people will speculate it. So there'll be speculation even. So where is the middle ground? What's the perfect solution? I think this is what's hindering the current administration, from the last administration to this one, to currently put what's in place now in law and enacting it. So is there any advice, particularly you, for Dr. McField, being a strong advocate for the advisory district councils, what best way to go about it? Because I want to do it, but I just don't want to do something, and then, once the discussion comes up in the Legislative Assembly, the law change, and then my whole thing is dismantled all over again.
Yeah, I think, Dr. McField, just before you chime in there, I think the whole question as to how do you form the advisory district councils, whether or not there should be any political influence in it at all, whether or not the Premier should have the appointment, whether or not the leader of the opposition should have the say in the appointment, whether or not the member for the constituency should have a role in that, or whether or not it should be left to the members of that constituency themselves to choose their representatives, who they want to represent them on an advisory district council. I don't know if you want to stay on, Mr. Bryan, and listen on the radio, or you can listen to the radio while we discuss it. But that's the question, Dr. McField.
Well, it for Mr. Bryan's point of view, the method of selecting the district council set against Section 4 of the law, the District Council's Law 2011, and I'll read it for him. It says, a council shall consist of the following members, all of whom shall be appointed by the governor and cabinet: a chairman, a vice chairman, a secretary, a treasurer, and not exceeding 6 other members, at least 2 of whom shall, subject to the subsection 2, be recommended by the leader of the opposition, appointed under Section 68 of the Constitution. And making the appointments, the governor and cabinet shall be cognizant of recommendations made to him from within the electoral districts. And then it says, where the representation in the Legislative Assembly for any given electoral district is split between 2 or more political parties, each party may make recommendations for appointments to the council for the district. But where the recommendations for the party in opposition are accepted, subsection 1E shall not affect. And a member of a council shall be a person who lives in the relevant electoral district and who is, by reason of his special qualifications and training, experience, or knowledge of the district, suitable for appointment to a council. Yep. So it seems to me that if the elected member of the district is interested in having an advisory council to him or to her in the district, they should have a meeting in the district with the members reside in the district, as the law says, and select people that they think would make good district councillors, and send them to the cabinet and say, we would like you to appoint these particular people.
Right. So, and that particular section that you read there, it makes it quite obvious that needs amendment, because now that you have single member constituencies, there's no such thing as having a member of government and a member of the opposition in that constituency. There is only one.
That's right.
There's only one.
That's right.
One elected representative. So that section needs to be amended. Let's grab another caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Yeah, well, see that last statement you just made, huh? Hello?
Yes, Doc. Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah. You know, that is so important, that last statement. That is so important, because the whole ball game has changed. the entry of the single member constituencies has changed the whole picture.
Yep.
How many single member constituencies we have in Georgetown?
About 5 or 6.
Okay, so that means that every elected member in Georgetown would want to have a representative on a district, on a council. And if that wasn't so, then it would be an issue. So you would have to have quite a few people. And you just mentioned the fact that how do you get the political balance that they had been envisioned by the previous concept, or the way that this concept would have been applied under the old system. So it changes it, because the central idea here is that we want to have better representative democracy. We want participatory democracy. We want people to be able to participate and not just to be represented. And we thought that this would be
We're losing you.
Yeah, we're losing you, Doc. Yeah, Doc, if you listen to your radio, can you turn it off, please?
Well, I'm not even near the radio.
Okay. So some interruption.
hear you now, though.
Yeah.
Well,
Sometimes I
As
get
long
that.
as it's on, we're gonna get a delay, Doc.
Well, Dr. McPhail, Dr. McPhail,
Dr. Maxfield.
Before what Art said, if you go on to look at what Section 4 says, subsection 4 says, where an electoral district does not have a member who belongs to the party whose leader has been appointed premier under Section 492 of the Constitution, the party or member shall be entitled to nominate up to 3 members to the relevant council. And then Section 5 says, subsection 5 says, if single member constituencies were to be introduced or new electoral districts added, subsection 4 shall apply to them in the same way as it applies to constituencies existing at the commencement of this law. So that clarifies the whole situation. That's what I said. So because in Georgetown Central, Mr. Bryan is not belong to the party whose leader has been appointed premier, he would have the right to nominate 3 people for that district. He would have the right to nominate 3 people for that district. Personally, to nominate 3 for that district, for Georgetown Central. And then whatever the other people in the district say should be part of the council, that would go up to the cabinet to be appointed.
Got you.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc, for that. We're going to try to squeeze one more call in before we go to headline news. I think Mr. Bryan has rejoined us.
Yes, I have. Thank
So,
you so
Mr.
much,
Bryan, for you.
What I was saying is, I read the law, Dr. Maxfield. I appreciate that. But what I was saying was, I know what it says in its current form, but the current administration, the premier himself, does not want to implement it in its current state. So even suggesting persons for it, if he's not accepting it, then I have no counsel. Hence the reason I'm in a position where you don't necessarily agree, where I appoint the whole thing and have it functioning. Because ultimately, what the pressure is on us as elected persons now is get your district councils done because you campaigned on it and you promised to do it. I want to do it, but if the premier, by the way of its law, the governor and cabinet does not want to institute it, what am I supposed to do other than appoint them myself?
Go to the court. You go to the court.
I never thought about that.
You go
That's
to
a
the
good
court and
point.
get judicial review, and get an order of mandamus to force people to do something that the law said they have to do. So it's quite easy, and you have a lot of people in your
Did it with permanent residents.
Yes, exactly, and for the law, you do not have to be permanent residents or command status to be on the district council. You only have to be living in the district. So it's no excuse to say they want if you get your district council together and send the names up to the governor and council that they will not do it. Go to the court.
Well, by all means, I'm not trying to make any
Well, that's what you seem to be doing. You should go to the court and say to the court the government is not following the law. They're acting ultra virus of the Constitution.
All right, Dr. Maxfield. Thank you so much for your advice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. We're going to go to headline news. When we return, I believe we have other callers on the line as well. Again, it seems that some people are familiar with the legislation. I must admit that I completely overlooked that section that actually made provisions.
That's right.
For the introduction of single-member constituencies, and there's no one who knows this better than you do, Dr. Macfield, because you were involved in the crafting of this legislation.
Myself and Leonard Dilbert.
Yeah. Okay,
yes.
We're going to headline news. For the record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We have a caller on hold. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, sir.
I see very little value in appointing someone to tell you what you want to hear. And I don't see any reason why our legislation and constitution can't provide for. I'm not talking about what the law is. I'm talking about what the law could be. I don't see any reason why we can't shape it so that we have people who are elected to the position of an advisory council. Mm-hmm. It's just a method of selection. And so if the concern is how do you get rid of bias, you have an election. That's my view.
Okay. Very, very good point. It seems, and I mentioned this the other day, that it seems as if some elected members of our legislative assembly may feel threatened by the fact that you may have another elected body that gives advice to them. Now, take note of the word that I use, advice, that gives advice to them, because it's only advice. You can follow advice or you can ignore the advice. So the mere fact that the advisory district council, the members there, may be elected by their peers does not derogate from the fact that elected members of the Legislative Assembly are still empowered to sit in that legislature and make laws for the good governance, peace and order and good governance of the Cayman Islands. Does not derogate from that at all. It doesn't change that at all. Why are they so fearful of having the members in a single member constituency just the same way that they have elected them to elect their representatives to give advice to that member of the Legislative Assembly? Why is that fear there?
Okay, so just to wheel back a little bit, I think in principle what the group was doing was legit. They want to make sure that there's a consensus that you must have the advisory district councils. There's also the consensus that they believe that if the persons appointed should be elected, they should go through that robust process that they as electors had gone, they as MLAs went through to actually arrive at that position. And I think that's because members in a local government normally set the overall direction of the municipalities. But here is the concern, I believe. If you have members of an advisory council that are broad-based and they are structured in a way that what is discussed is actually recorded, so there is an element of transparency, it then creates a situation and a possible conflict where the person who has been elected has to pay back persons who funded their campaign, and their views may be inconsistent with members of the advisory council. Mr. Bush at one point said, for example, and I thought this was interesting, he says, the people want their say. They want, for example, to say where the roads should be, how many roads should be, and whether schools should go there or whether they should be going in another place, so that members who participate on this advisory council would actually have a significant role to play. They would be people who are presumably well informed about the district, know exactly what the concerns are for the particular districts, and also be willing, hopefully, to have a national conversation about what is in the best interest of the country. Now, when they do this and they record these things may be inconsistent with what an MLA may want to implement. And perhaps that might raise some of the concerns that we're seeing now that's being airing out.
What's the difference when someone goes to the members of the Legislative Assembly's office and voice their view, or you get a group of constituents who sit down and write a letter and they all put their signature to it? Again, doesn't change anything. They can either accept that advice that has been given or reject it. They face the same consequences at the polls later on if they don't.
The thing with this, I believe, is because it's elevated to a constitutional position. And when you read through this this conversation, this seems to be what members were saying. We don't just want to have people having a say just because they want to give it that democratic participatory function so that people actually contribute to the way in which the country evolves. And that's kind of like separate and distinct from having a disorganized,
And it's important for the listening and viewing public to understand that those members of that advisory district council, they have to get feedback from the community in general. Yeah. So you creating another layer again where they will have meetings, they will sound out the constituents, and as a result of that, transmit the concerns that the constituents have to their elected members. So they're a go-between, they're a halfway house between.
But it's key because what the people want may not be what the MLAs have promised folks that funded their campaign want. And that, I think, is the crust of the matter here, and trying to find some balance where there's communication on one level, where the community is concerned, and where the MLAs are concerned.
Okay, Let's go to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
The tax man.
There's 3 months here this morning.
Morning.
It seems like this is Winston Churchill's famous words, an enigma shrouded in mystery. The politics is perennial, so there'll always be an element of politics that whichever way you do it, elected or appointed. What Mr. O.C. said and what you also alluded to, Mr. Issa, it's true. When he said it's advisory. The whole that word advisory, you don't have to take the advice. What happens if there's a general consensus that may be the way things can have changed since the election, since the manifesto promises were made, that those people who are appointed or elected might have a very, very important issue that needs to be, settled and or cleared up or done. And what will compel the elected representatives to follow that advice? As you said, it may not be according to what they have wanted to have done. And so we end up with a complex situation.
Yes.
Maybe this is why the Compass has written this. Well, they're always writing derogatory and denigrating and insulting things on Caymanians, especially elected representatives and the civil servants. So it's nothing new, but this is adding fuel to their fire. This is giving them fodder for what? Because of all.
The only difference is that they don't want advisory district councils at all.
At all.
Period.
They don't want none. So what I'm saying is, this maybe we should get this matter settled, as Dr. Markfield said, in the courts in Mr. Bryan's case. This is adding to the things not getting done in the 4-year span of government, and therefore we may be left with many important things not being done while we try to settle this matter.
that's why my lone voice had suggested some time ago, but I'm uneducated on. I don't have any knowledge about these things, but I can look at things from the outside and by the edge of that important university that Mr. Jim Barton once said, the University of Life, because I've been around quite a while and I lived in 12 different countries, lived and worked in 4 countries, that we're at what do we really do? What do we really want with as you said, that's why I suggested a 5-year term, that things could be settled politically or whatever you want to choose to call this conversation we're having. In 1 year, we get things straightened out, and the next 4 years we concentrate on getting the things that need to be done, that the government has said, or that the opposition has said, or the independents have suggested from their districts to get done. That's why I suggested that some time ago. Mm-hmm. I don't know how that sits with you all, but I just it's interesting, this conversation. It's very, very important because we have let the newspaper now come into it, and they can influence people. We know that. Have a wonderful day. I listen on to you.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you very much.
I would just like to
go ahead.
I would just like to bring a point here of something that you read, I think, off the air. People said.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you make that point yet?
Yeah, I'm going to raise that after we come back from the commercial break.
I would just like to address that when you come back from the commercial.
Certainly. Yeah. I think we have one caller. We can probably grab that caller before the commercial as well. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning, Oseen. Good morning to your co-host,
good morning.
Dr.
Good morning. Good morning. You heard us quote you this morning, right? I'll read directly, verbatim, not quote.
I didn't. I just heard the name Thompson and I wasn't sure. But I tuned in a bit late there. But I'd like to append to what Teresa was saying in terms of the reason why. I think Teresa only just hit part 1. Part 2, and I think which is also the 800-pound gorilla in the room, is simply this. To have those advisory committees on there, those are individuals who will be in the community, relaying the voice of the community. Mm-hmm. That in a when people are considering political office and holding political office, everybody has to watch out for their political future. And there is a very real and legitimate fear that those people then become so popular as a representative of the community that it then will
usurp
their current member, and when they're on next election, they are voted out and that person is voted in. And they don't want to admit it. I've had private conversations, but it is a fact. And logic will dictate that. At the end of the day, if I can go to somebody and that person can relay my troubles, and there even if it isn't resolved, that there was some apparent attempt to get something resolved on my behalf, then that person is the one that I owe a debt of gratitude to some extent, right? Human nature being what it is. So that, to me, coupled with what Teresa was saying about those who funded the campaigns and who are lobbying for certain concessions or what have you, are the ones that dictate why they are so reluctant to have this. That's just my 2 cents. But I really enjoy the fact that you guys are actually having real conversations about real issues, and it's certainly educating the people. And when the people say that they don't have access to this information, it's because they're not looking for it. Wonderful job, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that.
But Ada, remember Ralston quickly said that, the reason why it's important to have these district councils is precisely because politicians really don't have that kind of time and opportunity, especially when they're ministers, to actually attend to these things. So maybe some element of jealousy, but perhaps not the overall reason as to why. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, let's take a commercial break. For the Record, we'll be back shortly. Good morning and welcome back to For the Record. We have one caller. Caller, good morning. Welcome to For the Record.
Good morning to you all.
Good morning, ma'am.
A special good morning to Miss Teresa.
Morning.
Patrick had reminded me that you had asked about me and prayed for me, and I thank you very much. I wanted to say that from a couple of days ago. I'm doing well, thank God.
Excellent.
Thank God for good doctors and the gift of medicine Thank God. This subject you're on today, or you go on many, many subjects, and it's all very interesting. But I never seen a district council in West Bay. Some time ago, they had chosen one, and it was too much politics involved in it. Yeah, but you didn't vote for me. Yeah, but you didn't, and that's how it went. And it went on like that till it really wasn't chosen. The only district council that I know about, and has been for many years, was in Northside. But I hope that we would agree in getting these district councils. That is so very important. And I also agree that it should be people from the district that knows the people and knows what's going on in the district and in Cayman. But other people might like to call in. Mm-hmm. And good morning again. And I hope you all have a good day. Continue this very important subject. And thanks for all that you all are doing and saying.
Thank you very much, caller, for that, and we're glad to hear that you're doing better as well. Yeah. One listener has written in and said, and I'm going to try to avoid calling, identifying, but they're from a particular constituency, and they say that members of that constituency have turned against their elected representative because that representative has handpicked the best friend to head up the district council. The community feels that it is biased and corrupted. They claim that this person knows nothing about how a district council should be run and has no experience in knowing about the constitution or election rules. And they wanted to determine if we think that this is something for people to be upset about, that we should discuss it on there. So, Dr. Macfield, that concern is a hand-picked person to head up the district councils. Now, I don't know whether or not this person has been hand-picked to get the get everything in place in relation to it, or whether or not this person will actually be the chairperson of the advisory district council, or if they're, like I said earlier, chosen to get things up and running in relation to it, or to get the structure, try to get the structure in place.
Well, let me just say right off the bat that the provisions in the law indicates that the representation on the district council should be fair, open, and balanced. Mm-hmm. That is the first thing. Mm-hmm. Now, when you look at the going back to the section, it says the governor in cabinet may give such directions as he may consider necessary for expedient with respect to the content of proposals for appointment under this section, including the manner in which nominations may be made from the communities involved for consideration by the governor and cabinet.
Mm-hmm. And I'd like you to read, for our purposes, the one that you read earlier in relation to the composition of the advisory district councils, and if there is no member representing the government or the opposition or whatever. Can you read that particular section?
Yes, that is section 4. It says where the representation in legislative assembly for any given electoral district is split between two or more political parties, each party may make recommendations for the appointment to the council. But it goes on to say a member of the council shall be a person who lives in the district, and then it says where an elected district does not have a member who belongs to the party, whose leader has been appointed premier under sections 449(2). For instance, Georgetown. Mm-hmm. Has a member who does not belong to the party who the premier come from.
Let's say, for instance, Georgetown Central.
Georgetown Central.
Okay.
So where an electoral district does not have a member who belongs to the party whose leader has been appointed premier under Section 49(2) of the Constitution, the party or member shall be entitled to nominate up to 3 members to the relevant council. So Brian would have the right to nominate 3 members of the district council.
In addition to the
other members
and the leader of the opposition and an appointment by the governor.
Yes. And to be fair, how we envisage that to be. The member for the district would go to the district and call a meeting of the members of the district. And he would say, the cabinet, he would say, there would be the chairman, vice chairman, secretary, treasurer, and 6 members. Now, he would ask people from the district to nominate people that they think that would be chairman or vice chairman or secretary or treasurer or whatever. And people would say, well, I would nominate Mr. Orrit Connor because I think he has knowledge of this and that. And then he would ask the audiences if all of them agree or not agree. And that is how the selection for the district council should go. The people in the district should nominate people and present to him their nominees along with his nominees to go to the executive, to go to governor cabinet to be appointed as district councillors.
So the executive, the chairman, the treasurer, and stuff like that, those appointments would be separate and apart. The selection of those would be separate and apart from the
6 other members. Yes,
got you. Okay.
And so now, for instance, in Borden Town East, they might say, Mr. Ebanks, I believe, would be a better chairman than Mr. Smith, and the member would say, well, who want to have Mr. Ebanks or Mr. Smith? And the majority of people who vote for Mr. Ebanks, he would recommend him as the chairman.
So it's really not imperative on the representative, the elected representative, to choose the chairperson.
It's wrong. That's not democracy. As I have said, that's not open and balanced and fair. And so if that has happened, that's not open, balanced, and fair, and that is completely wrong. And it does not comply with the spirit of the law as it is written.
2 questions that we have from people who are not online but call in. One, whether or not members of the advisory district councils would be paid for their services. And the other question has to do with conflict of interest, whether or not we would look in appointments, whether or not you would look at any possible conflicts of interest. I would say that everybody's going to have an interest in their district. You would look at conflict of interest whenever particular issues arose. And let's say, for instance, if someone is making a recommendation, maybe we should put a play field here or a school there or whatever, whether or not they have an interest in that property or the surrounding property in that regard. But I don't think that should be looked at in relation to the selection process.
Well, Section 6 says that members who are not public officers are, as defined in the Constitution, shall be paid allowances as the governor in cabinet may determine. I envisage that those allowances would be the same as board members. Board members, if you meet, you get paid for having the meetings and so forth. And the payments of such allowances shall be paid out of the revenue of the island, so that you would get a stipend, but you wouldn't have a salary. But you would get a stipend.
Right. Very quickly, and those of you who have been on the boards, especially Caymanian, the immigration boards, membership on those boards, some of the memberships are chosen by district. Each district is represented on the board. Like, for instance, the status board, work permit board. Those selections are usually done through the advice given by the elected member for that district. So in East End, normally Mr. Arden McLean, North Side, Mr. Miller, whatever. What is so difficult about the advisory district councils that makes them more fearful in terms of the appointment process as opposed to other boards?
You know what it is? Let me read it. Section 5 says, the functions of a council to advise on policies and development programs intended for the more effective discharge of the relevant members' duties in relation to the relevant electoral district after consultation with such persons or organizations or both as the council considers appropriate, to advise the member on policies and programs intended for the more effective discharge of the member's responsibilities, to establish, maintain, and operate information systems and facilities, and to encourage and support among residents the formal and informal exchange of information of all kinds in respect of policies and programs proposed by the minister. That is the reason they do not want to take advice from the people who elected them. After the election is over that night, and the votes are counted, and they're elected, they don't want to see you again till the next 4 years.
So they want democracy with a small d rather than democracy with a big D.
That's the reason why.
Democracy with a small d.
Or the idea of
Yes.
democracy, but not the reality.
Not the reality.
Yeah,
of it.
reality
yes.
of it.
Yes. Okay. Well, we're getting ready to about that time. I know, Mr. Risa, you've made some comments as well in relation to that. In terms of a wrap-up, anything else that you want to discuss? Because we'll probably pick up this topic again on Friday when the official opposition here as well. If they want to discuss aspects of this, we probably will. But
I'd actually go back to the rooster point. I know that this digresses just a little bit, but I think that we're slightly in willful denial of our reality in that we have to consider immigration and poverty, immigration and culture, immigration and our employment situation, and our immigration and our economy. We have to start talking about how these interact to develop a national plan for the community.
okay, Dr. Macfield, very quickly.
I just want to just share with some of you listeners some of the stuff that I have written by myself. This not come from the law. The role of the District Advisory Council should be to advise elected members on issues, decisions, and or policy matters that the district is facing, to be informed about the background, rationale, and decision-making processes made by the district throughout the year or as issue arises, and to communicate issues and concerns raised by the various stakeholders as represented by District Advisory Council members, and to share the district mission with a variety of representative groups, and to accurately represent the whole district constituency.
Okay. One of our listeners, and I want to read this because it's extremely important, says, I am not as astute in law and the Constitution as the panel, but this business of district councils, and from my understanding, that means district, not constituency. We have 6 electoral districts, which then have the number of electoral representatives from the constituencies where they were elected. So therefore, in the district of Georgetown, we have 7 from the constituencies representative who should then be representative of the district councils and have their sub-office within the district council's office. My understanding is for district inclusive of the constituency that we would give us 6 district councils. My opinion would be that then there could be a district election for nominated members of the district. Again, Dr. Macfield, I'm going to seek very quickly your input on this because you were on the Boundaries Commission where certain recommendations were made. We now have 19 single-member constituencies. We no longer have the electoral district of East End, the electoral West Bay, the electoral district of Georgetown. They are all now single-member constituencies with defined boundaries, constitutionally defined boundaries as well. Am I correct with that, Dr. Macfield?
Harvey?
No, I was saying that we no longer have electoral districts. The 6, we have single-member constituencies now. 19 of them. That is why we say that you would have 19 advisory district councils as opposed to 6.
Well, it's in the law.
Yeah.
If people have read it, it says without limiting the scope of subsection 2, the council for an electoral district may advise. So it's an electoral district. It's not the geographical district of East End or the geographical district of West Bay or the geographical district of Georgia is for the electoral districts. And when it's talking about the member, if you take us to the final conclusion, it talks about advising the person elected for the electoral district. We don't have one person elected for the whole West Bay. We have one for West Bay North, one for West Bay South, one for West Bay Central, and one for West Bay South. So it is the electoral district that the advisory council that the law is talking about.
Right.
It's not for
19 of them, not
19
6.
of them. It's not 6 of them.
Yes.
It's
Folks,
19 of them.
I want to thank you for allowing Radio Cayman and by extension For the Record into your homes, into your vehicles as you traverse the busy roads of the Cayman Islands, into your places of work, whether it be an office cubicle or if you're working in the outdoors. I also want to thank my co-host, my panel this morning with me as well for such a good discussion. I will also be seeking from management to see whether or not we can put this document, it is a public document, and whether or not we can put this document up on the website for Radio Cayman for you to read as well, and you can see exactly what our representatives had to say, as well as persons from civic organizations when it came to the discussions on the Constitution and in particular on the advisory district councils. I want to remind you that we are our brothers and our sisters keepers. There is always someone out there who is less fortunate than we are, and I ask you to extend a helping hand to them. If you can't do that, then I suggest you donate to a worthy charity, because we always want to consider those who need, not necessarily those who want. And again, in the Eastern Caribbean, we're going to find more people with additional needs, again, as a result of being hit by a second hurricane within the same month as well. I say to you, have a great day. Continue to support your radio station, Radio Cayman. Join Sterling Greeningbegs at 12 noon for Talk today. Have a great day, and as usual, we ask the good Lord to bless these 3 beautiful, wonderful Cayman Islands.
For the Record.
Informative, impartial, insightful.
This is your talk show.
1-800-534-8255. Your calls, your input. This is For the Record.